from ABC News Radio, KMET 1490 in Southern California. This is BizNinja, Entrepreneur Radio, with your host, Tyler Jorgensen.
Welcome out to BizNinja Radio. This is your host, Tyler Jorgensen, and I am excited to have Jeff Rosenblum, the author of Friction. And I was lucky enough to get an advanced copy of the book that's coming out on May 23rd. And I will tell you what, Jeff, I've read a lot of books. I've had a lot of authors on, and I am loving this book, not only from a aesthetic side. You guys, the design that you did on this is just amazing, but the content. And one of my favorite quotes so far, and I want to have you talk on this, is the concept of whoever says the most in the least amount of words win. The topic of the book is friction. What is friction, and who are you?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for the compliments, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it a ton. And to be honest with you, you're one of the first folks that have actually read the book. Only a handful of people got pre-release copies, and it is scary as shit writing a book. I mean, we made a documentary a few years ago, but you get to screen it at certain intervals and show it to people, and you tighten it up. And I put the book out there, and I almost had a panic attack. 9 times out of 10, I'm a pretty chill dude, but it's really nice to get the positive feedback, and I appreciate it. And the designers, I have no design skills at all. So the fact that you like the aesthetics, I'll pass along those props to the design team. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, no sweat.
Absolutely.
So you took this huge leap to write a book and to put it out there. And I know that was scary, but who is Jeff Rosenblum, and why a book?
Yeah, sure. A couple great questions. So to answer your first one, which is what's friction, right? Friction is anything that gets in the way of what you want to accomplish in life. It's anything that gets in the way of your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations, or even just your mundane day-to-day goals, right? It's those big things that prevent you from being who you want to be, and it's those little things that prevent you from doing what you want to do, right? So people don't necessarily want brands to interrupt them with great advertising anymore. They want brands to solve their problems. They want brands to fight friction. So when brands do this, it's not just simply about getting customers, it's about winning evangelists. And evangelists carry this message forward better than any paid advertising tool ever could, right? So your question about why did I write the book? It's because I've spent over 2 decades now in marketing and advertising, and really spending a lot of my time focused on what people really want, and conducting a lot of research and looking at a lot of data. And at the end of the day, we found that brands that fight friction become passion brands. They absolutely dominate the competition, like 8-1 over a 10-year period, financial performance. There's nothing I can personally do in advertising that's going to lead to that type of bottom line performance. And that's what friction is all about.
So friction really is the opposite of something that I'm a huge believer in, which is in the importance of momentum in any business, right? And in any endeavor. And I think so many businesses today, are having a hard time identifying what their friction is. I think they're not realizing that their advertising methods or their employee and hiring methods are creating friction for their people. So how should companies identify what this friction is in their situation?
Yeah, so great point. And I totally agree. We actually thought about titling the book Momentum and really building it upon that approach. But we went with friction because the issue is that there's an infinite number of places where brands can now reach consumers, right? It used to be you have a handful of agencies, you got 3 big networks. Now there's literally thousands of different tools that brands can use. And we only know offhand, some of the obvious ones: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat. I mean, by the time we get off this, there's going to be 4 new social platforms, right? So what are brands to do? So we can actually apply a mathematical model to this. And what you can look at is, how important are all these different touch points? How well are you performing in all of these touch points? How differentiated will you be with each of these touch points? In using that, you can create a numerator, and then you can divide it by how much does it take to invest, right? So it's in the book. I don't want to bore everyone right now with the formula, but the point is, it's like when Bill Walsh created the West Coast offense and won 4 Super Bowls or 5 Super Bowls for the San Francisco 49ers. It's about putting the ball where the other team isn't. Everyone's putting it into great advertising, which used to be on TV and still is. And now it's great advertising on like Facebook and Snapchat. There's a whole mess of other places where brands can create value and ultimately create the momentum that you're talking about.
And so those other places are not necessarily new media platforms, but also just areas of their business, right? Areas of their marketing mix that may not be, where do I spend my dollars in terms of like billboards, but it may be, where do I put my energy in terms of customer treatment and brand, right? Just handling the company. How do you organize a company that creates or removes friction, right?
No, it's a great point. It's about creating content and tools that empower people, that improve their lives one small step at a time. And what happens when you do that is people go out of their way to participate in this content, and then they share it with others, as opposed to TV ads and banner ads and pop-ups where like we keep creating them and the audience keeps running away, right? So Patagonia would make like an immersive microsite that lets people look at the entire supply chain to help them understand how can we have a healthier environment. Yeti makes a series of amazing 8-minute videos that are completely inspiring about ways that you can have bigger adventures. Companies like Sweetgreen have delicious products, but they've gone one step further and said, hey, use our app so you don't have to sit on the 60-minute long line waiting for your customized meal. It's right there. Companies like USAA, right, really boring, you would think, like financial services, but they've invested in technology to make it much more convenient, and even customer service. Like, let's not forget about customer service. Like, having a great experience leads to evangelism. Like, there's nothing you can do through an ad that's going to cover up crappy customer service. So USAA puts it in technology and puts it in their training. Like, compare that to United Airlines that's beating up and dragging people down the hall,
Yeah, absolutely. And I recently heard of a supplement company that built their entire business without any marketing dollars. And instead what they did was every time a customer was on the phone, the customer service rep was tasked to making that person, when they hung up the phone, just want to talk to 10 friends about how amazing the experience was, whether it was a return or a replacement, whatever it was. They had to just wow them to a point where they became an evangelist, right? And so that's where all their dollars went, was in keeping the clients they acquired amazingly happy.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think advertising is honestly filled with some of the most creative and intelligent people in the world. And we can tap into that by just expanding what the definition of advertising is. It doesn't have to be about interruptions. It can be about empowerment. Anything that's going to drive people not towards purchasing, but drive them through to evangelism. Get them so excited that they're going to sit around the bar, they're going to sit at the dinner table, they're going to sit at the campfire, they're going to buy a hat, get a t-shirt, get a tattoo, anything that's going to get these guys to spread the message. So, we've all seen, an infinite number of ads for supplement companies. Right. They become really invisible. But this company that you mentioned, they're investing in something a lot more meaningful.
And there's, anytime a revolution happens, right, there's people that hang on to the past. And I think that we're going through another one of these revolutions where, like what you're saying, people don't want to be interrupted anymore. And I don't think they ever did, but before it used to be, it was new and it was interesting, back when it was just a commercial before one of the only 3 TV stations running, right? It was like, okay, it's interesting to learn about the Burma shave or whatever. But now, and so there's people hanging on to that old model. Why do you think that startups and upstarts have an advantage in today's world?
Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head. They have an advantage because they're not hamstrung by legacy business models, right? I worked with a client, one of the biggest companies in the world, and let's just use the name, Gertrude, right? We're meeting this woman, Gertrude, right? And we sit in and we told her about this idea for this empowering platform. And we're, blah, 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 doing our best work here. And she literally laughs at us. Right. And this was a solid time ago. It was like 8 years ago. She literally laughs at us. She's like, no, this is not how you do it. I'm going to tell you how to do it. She's like, we're going to spend X dollars in media. Fine. I get it. And we're going to spend X dollars on creative development. But it's not just that. We know for the first 8 seconds, the protagonist is going to tell this story. Then for the next 4 seconds, they're going to show the product. And then the last 6 seconds, they're going to sit on the couch, hold the product, and smile. Research proves this works. And she was right? She should be laughing at us. We're sort of young and idealist and all that stuff. The problem is the world got totally disrupted by search and social and mobile technology. So the audience isn't sitting there complacently just watching that story. If they were, it works perfectly. But up to 89% of TV ads are completely ignored. And digital's not saving us. You've got a better chance of surviving a plane crash, mathematically speaking, than clicking on a banner ad, right? You need this new model. And let's say you go to undergrad, and then let's say you go someplace great. Let's say you go to Harvard, right? Then you go to Harvard Business School, right? And then you become, a manager of marketing, a VP of marketing, EVP. You get up to CMO level, right? You're part of this machine. You've made this technique work really, really well. Except 10 years ago, it got disrupted. So they're still sort of holding on to it. So when you look at, the brands that are just changing the world, right? Whether or not we think Uber is perfect, right? They've got problems, but they're changing the world in a lot of ways. Airbnb is changing the world in a lot of ways. Some of the upstarts like Sweetgreen, they're changing the world in a lot of ways. They've got evangelists and all that. They're not hamstrung by those models. They're started by kids, genius kids, but they're taking a fresh look at it. And I don't know if they're necessarily thinking this way, but they're fighting friction at every turn.
And what I agree 100%. And I think what's interesting about the young startup is what the difference of a young startup looks at from their key performance indicator and what a legacy CMO that came through the trenches 20 years ago, what they look at. And I think the difference is today our data is so fast. We can split test and we can test data instantly. So we don't have to even have theories anymore. We don't have to be like, well, I think this will work, right? Because it's like, hey, I don't know, let's test it. And you can get statistically significant results in minutes and move on that. And I think the younger, and I don't say young in terms of age, but at least young in terms of people looking at it from today's environment, right? That people that have adjusted to today's like social mobile atmosphere they just move so much faster. They pivot so much faster. And so they just get through the learning cycle so much quicker. And I mean, I've watched companies like little guys with no investment capital go from $0 to $1 million a month by just pivoting rapidly.
Yeah, it's a radical shift because that makes perfect sense. I think people would be surprised to see what goes on the opposite end of the spectrum, where ideas sometimes take a year to develop, right? These upstarts that get to $1 million a month in revenue that you're talking about, they might get there. They might have the idea within minutes. They might be able to test it within hours, certainly within a handful of days, while the competition is spending a year developing it. And look, they work at huge corporations, right? They can't make massive mistakes. There's too much risk involved. And so
that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the issues is the risk that some people that are in the entrenched situation, right? They don't want to take those risks. But the days of Mad Men where you spend hours drafting up a storyboard, presenting it to someone for Q1, in Q1 for a Q4 launch, that's gone, right? Like if you're not reacting and seeing what's happened in the market now, you're just going to miss trends. I mean, trends move so much faster. What are I love some of the examples that you share in the book, like Patagonia, and what are some of the other examples of brands that are helping people solve problems as a way to remove friction?
Yeah, well, why don't I dig a little deeper into one that I mentioned earlier, which is USAA.
Okay.
Right. And the reason it's worth digging into is when I talk about Patagonia and everything they do to sort of defend the environment, and then Yeti coolers, which is all about like these great outdoor adventures, or North Face, or Soul Cycle is one that we all know and women love, and a lot of people will be like, well, those categories are inherently cool. So they've got a significant advantage. Well, one thing is, let's talk about Yeti, for example, actually, before USAA. They make a cooler. Like coolers have been around since the dawn of time. It's the most mundane, boring product ever. It's a box, and it keeps your beer and your soda and your bologna sandwiches cold. And first they fought friction by making this product fundamentally better than you would ever need. They're literally certified grizzly bear proof. So you could go on a bigger adventure than ever, but then they created all these great videos. They took a mundane product and turned it into a lifestyle brand. So one of the action items is don't think that fighting friction And becoming a lifestyle brand or becoming a passion brand is reserved for certain categories. USAA, it's financial services. And so many people, when I work with them in financial services, are like, oh, stop talking about motorcycles, stop talking about Patagonia. Those are sexy categories. Like, yeah, well, money's pretty sexy, man. People like money, Every category is important, right? And that's why people are spending their hard-earned dollars. So USAA, for example, it's a financial service that's primarily for people in the military and their families. And what they realize is a lot of people that need to deposit checks in the military are actually overseas. So they created a technology where you could take a picture of the check and automatically deposit it. You don't have to go to the bank. And if you're listening to this, you're like, well, big deal, right? Because every company has that. Every financial service, every bank has that. Right. USA developed it. USAA licensed it. They're fundamentally smaller than every other bank, but they focused in on how do we remove that friction. They focused in on empathy, empathizing for their customers, an innate and fundamental and intimate understanding of their needs. So that's what it's really about. Like, break the addiction to advertising, focusing on empowerment. And not to say advertising can't do great things, but first you have to empower.
I think one of the big shifts, like I'm very visual and I like metaphors. And so when it comes to banking, I think there's a difference between old school customer service and today's removing friction. And an example would be like old school customer service means the line at the bank is really long. So you serve free coffee, right? Yep. That's old school. New school is the line at the bank is long. Let's stop people from even, if they don't want to come to the bank, let's let them deposit it from their phone, right? That's changing the situation, not just, making them comfortable while they're in a bad situation. And so I think that's what, USAA was able to do. They're able to look at the customer situation and say, how do we change this so that they have a better experience? Not just how do we make a bad experience more palatable?
It's scary, man. The bar is getting raised every day. Like that cup of coffee back in the day was probably awesome. Like, wow, you really understand my needs. I love a cup of coffee right now. Now it's like, F you, man. I'm sitting online. I don't want to sit on a line, right? So one of the things we talk about in the book is it doesn't matter what category you're in. Uber is your competition, right? Customers don't have any empathy for your brand. They just have heightened expectations. Like I can stay at someone's house in Hawaii and get that taken care of in like 2 hours or 20 minutes on Airbnb. I can be virtually anywhere and I don't have to raise my arm and I can get a car from Uber anywhere. Like this is the way people are being raised now. They expect these types of things. So whether you're selling supplements or financial services, you're competing with the expectations of the Uber customer.
And I think as frustrating as that can be for some people, I think it's also a huge opportunity because so many people are so entrenched that we always use the saying that sometimes you just have to be one step above crap and you're going to stand out because so many people just aren't moving and so many businesses just aren't adjusting. And so, if a company or, if there's an entrepreneur or a business owner listening today, right, what are those first steps they can do to start removing friction and building that momentum?
Yeah, great point. So I think the theme that you're alluding to is, don't let perfect get in the way of good, right? Especially going back to your earlier point, which is you can iterate very quickly. Now, I also think there's this whole theme of like fail quickly. And there's these like conferences, FailCon, and people are embracing failure. Like that is some really stupid shit in my opinion, right? We should not be, there's no need to embrace failure, but we also don't want to get married to perfection. So I think the biggest starting point is, well, let me put it to you this way. In my industry, working with big companies, we put together very lengthy strategic planning decks. It's like 80 pages of PowerPoint, hundreds of bullet points, hundreds of data points. All this stuff is to make sure that we don't mess anything up.
Sure.
But to your point about like entrepreneurs and starting a business, you don't need all that stuff. But I think you can simplify this whole equation down to one thing, which is how do I help people get more out of my category, right? It's that simple. How can I help them get more out of my category. And it seems so obvious, like, why wouldn't I want to do that, right? But like, the question is, how do you surround the product with the totality of the experience, right? So like Delta Airlines, shifting over to a big company, doesn't just think about the airplane, they look at the entire terminal, right? There's not much you can do with those airplanes, they're uncomfortable, but they looked at the terminal and they put iPads everywhere so people can get information, and they built partnerships, world-class restaurateurs, and now there's actually great food and great drink and all that stuff. So if you can help people get more out of your category, if you could go on a hike, go on a long walk, and think about that, I think that's where the great ideas are from. They're not from the notion of how do I make a great ad or how do I get great data.
And I think we're starting to realize that the brand experience is not just the moment that someone sees your ad and orders, right? But that that brand experience is a much longer timeline, especially if it's a product that's with somebody for a while. So like with an airline, it's short-sighted to think that it's just the flight, right? Because it's the booking experience, the check-in, it's the curbside, it's the moment in the lounge, it's the time from when they purchase the ticket till they get on the plane until, weeks after when they're sharing their pictures with their friends on social media. That's the lifespan of that experience, right? And so I think with the companies that are able to recognize that consumer lifespan or that engagement lifespan is way longer than what a traditional transaction is because of social, they're able to kind of build that and see, man, there's so many more opportunities here for that deeper engagement, right?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think it goes back to your point about momentum, right? So I don't have the numbers memorized, but literally the human brain literally is exposed to like billions of bits of information every day. We're exposed to a branded message every 2.7 seconds. We make a decision on a mobile device every 2.1 seconds. There's like 30,000 bits of information every second. It's something ridiculous, right? So what do we need? As human beings, we need shortcuts. We can't process all that information, right? So, here's an example. You go to a restaurant. You've never been there before. Doesn't look great, doesn't look too bad. You got to go to the bathroom. You go down to the bathroom and it's gross, right? It smells bad. There's toilet paper on the floor. The toilet's dirty, right? We've all been there.
Right.
What's the first thing that goes through our mind? It's not, ew, this bathroom is gross. It's, ew, this kitchen is gross. Ew, this restaurant is gross. You take the shortcut of what you can see, the bathroom, and extrapolate that into the greater experience. So it's not just about these little individual moments. It's about these shortcuts that people create. When people go up on a website, Google conducted this study. People make a decision about that website in 1/20th of a second. It's quicker than you could snap your fingers, right? They measure this with neuroscience. And ultimately what they realized is in that time, people realize, do I want to engage or do I not want to engage? Do I want to click off or do I want to go one step further and, to your point, gain momentum? Right. So yes, it's about social, but it's about every single place that you touch a customer to build that momentum and create positive, not negative shortcuts.
I think one of the hard things for any company with this concept is it requires playing the long game, right? Yes. And I think that's the way to play it. Let's be clear there. But I think sometimes it's hard because when you're building momentum, you don't always see it at the beginning, right? And you don't see the wave as it builds. I mean, when Zappos decided that hey, we're going to make people's buying shoes online easier by offering free returns and free shipping and that kind of stuff. At the beginning, the shareholders and everyone just saw it as we're going to lose tons of money, right? Yeah. Because all they saw was the cost in the first quarter, not the upside benefit of the momentum. So how do you bridge that gap because there's still going to be people that you're still going to need to report to the finance guys, and you're still going to need to be able to show how you get from A to Z, right? So how do you bridge the gap of new school, old school, or friction-free versus, entrenched?
It's exactly right. The performance sits on an exponential curve. Slow, fast. Holy smokes, this thing is taking off like Amazon stock, right? Flat for a while, and all of a sudden it's a vertical line, right? Same thing is true here. And in the world of marketing and advertising, we live in this or world, right? It's not TV, right? Now it's social. It's not desktop. Now it's mobile, right? And everyone's trying to say it's this or that. It's really an and world, right? So I think this whole story and everything that you're talking about is not about the death of advertising. That false eulogy has been written before. Advertising can still do incredible things. We're just asking it to do too much. So we're living in an and world. We need to create these content and experiences that fight friction, and we need to do short-term stuff so that the CFO doesn't fire us and pivot into something else. So you have to move the needle, right, with some traditional advertising, and then you have some of the long-term stuff with these content and tools. And what's great is when you do both of these things, it lives in a virtuous cycle because they're all creating data. Every time somebody interacts with these contents or the experiences, you learn about their demographics, their psychographics, their behaviors, their purchase motivators, their barriers. So you can not only improve that experience, but you can also improve the ads. So over and over, it all gets better. And then the other thing is, of course, we're living in the age of transparency. So if you're in a small business and you've got a CFO you need to report to, be transparent with these numbers. You have to be transparent with what you're expecting. Right. And that seems pretty obvious, but I work with some small companies, I work with some big companies, and there's not a lot of specificity, right? And that's what transparency is about. You need that specificity to say, look, we're going to do this, and we're not going to be incredible in the short term, but the exponential curve will hit 14 months out, that kind of deal.
I love that you're the this and that, not this or that. I think sometimes we get into this battle of it's either the old or the new. It's either A or B, when usually it's some kind of a hybrid of both. I was talking with someone who had been a CMO through the 80s and 90s of some big companies, and we were talking about the importance of advertising on Facebook, and he was very much entrenched in the old way of doing business. And so he's like, I don't understand why you would spend $1 there when you can put that much money, your money into a Super Bowl ad. And I mean, I just had Gary Brackett on the show, and he, when he won the Super Bowl in, I think 2006, the cost of a 30-second commercial then was $2.6 million. So this is the time frame that this guy was a CMO, right? And I'm like, $2.6 million on a Super Bowl ad and no dollars on Facebook. I'm like, if you had to choose A or B, I'm obviously going to lean towards Facebook. But really, it comes down to if you're going to do a Super Bowl ad and not do a proper engagement and not approach how do we remove friction, then you're throwing up a massive amount of money to an old model. It really should be how do we blend the two. And those are the best ads that are going through the Super Bowl now, are the ones that take that ad and move people into an online, mobile, digital environment and use that as to do both, right? And to blend everything. And so I think the companies that are going to continue to thrive are the ones that understand it is going to be a mix of A and B, and you got to use advertising to start the message and get things out there. But if you're doing that and not removing friction to whatever you're sending people to, then you're really just wasting dollars.
Yeah. I mean, we see this data all the time. I saw that data literally yesterday, and working with a CMO, and she was talking about the power of TV. In TV, mathematically, for a lot of brands and a lot of categories, is an incredible way to reach the audience. I'm a digital guy. I'd love to poo-poo TV advertising, but I know it still works incredibly well because the costs are down, the targeting is better, people are engaged. So if you do that and then you test it against just doing on social, sometimes TV is better, sometimes social better. But what's unequivocal is when you stack the two together and you create synergies, to your point.
Right.
Yeah, we're living in an and world. And I couldn't think of anything more dangerous than spending $2.6 million on a Super Bowl ad and then not having extensions through every other channel, or doing lazy stuff with the extensions. Like, okay, I'm going to put behind the scenes footage on Facebook and maybe a 15-second version on Facebook. Like, no, man, people flock to Facebook for a very specific reason. And when they interact with brands, they want utility. They don't want just interruptions. So you need to find an authentic place for your brand, for that message in all of those channels.
Absolutely. I love this subject. I'm thoroughly enjoying the book. I'm about halfway through. And so I hope that everyone grabs this. It's coming out on May 23rd. So if it's frictionthebook.com, and you can check it out. Even the website is awesome. You get a lot of cool tidbits there. Jeff, I like to ask everyone, because to me, business and advertising and marketing and all this stuff, we do this because it's fun, but also because it's there to create a lifestyle that we want. So for Jeff, what's one of your personal bucket list items that you want to accomplish in the next 12 months?
holy smokes, I'm totally caught off guard.
This is my curveball. I hit everyone with it. And so it's fun because all of a sudden we go from talking business stuff to Jeff.
You know what I want? In addition to continuing to be good with my clients and good with the book and all that stuff, whatever, let's get over that. And continue to want to be a great dad, which is like, that's it. That's the number one thing for me. Great dad and great husband, by the way. You can't be one without the other. But the other thing is, I got to learn how to play guitar. Man, I've had this thing. I just bought another one this weekend, a cheap entry-level one. If you listen to me play guitar, you're like, dude, you're pretty good for a beginner. I've had a guitar for like over a decade. I absolutely suck. And I just, if off the top of my head, if there's one thing I want to accomplish in 12 months is not suck at guitar. It's a pretty low bar I'm looking for, but I'd like to get to the not suck level.
I love it. Hey, well, my dad was self-taught and became a professional guitar player. And he had his piece of advice for anyone that wants to learn is you put your guitar on your bed every morning and you don't go to bed until you practice for at least a half hour. And so you put it on your bed so you can't lay down until you've practiced. So there's my dad's advice to you, right? So
great advice. It may conflict with my goal of being a great husband. I'm not so sure my wife wants a guitar in bed, but I'll try it.
Set it on your chair somewhere in your home office. That way it's there. But the principle can be applied anywhere, right? Sometimes with guitar work and with those kind of things, we almost have to create friction so that we can do it, right? We have to interrupt ourselves.
Power in it.
Hey, greatly appreciate you coming out. I'm loving the book, and I wish you tons of success with it. Would love to stay connected and hear how it goes and how your journey takes you forward. So thanks for coming out. And for those that are listening, check out Friction, the book. It's your turn to go out and do something.
Thank you for listening to BizNinja Entrepreneur Radio with Tyler Jorgensen. Please make sure to subscribe so you're first to hear new interviews and episodes. If you found this podcast to be valuable, please share it with a friend. Don't forget to visit our online dojo at bizninja.com to claim your reward for listening to the show.